Okay, we'll move now to the final section where we're right on time here, even just ahead of it. So that's good. The final bit's a panel discussion, and I'm actually on that panel, so I can't remain as MC. That would be some weird sort of conflict of interest. So I'm going to hand over the reins to our panel host and moderator, who's bobbed up on your screens. That's Anita Arbogast. She is the Executive Director of the Melbourne Business School, holding Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Arts from Melbourne Uni and an MBA from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Anita's the Executive Director, as I said, of the Centre for Business Analytics at Melbourne Business School, where she's responsible for the development and execution of the centre's strategy to transform decision-making through advanced analytics, very core to the heart of what we're talking about today. Previously, Anita led the Commonwealth Bank's institutional banking and markets education client coverage team, driving 30% portfolio growth in 2 years and acting as the sole lead arranger in the world's first certified green bond for the university sector in the US private placement market. Finally, Anita spent 15 years of her career in the US in leadership roles at GE Capital and most recently at MIT's Sloan School of Management before returning to Australia in 2016. So highly credentialed, highly experienced, and I'm pleased to hand over the reins for the rest of the day to Anita.
Thank you very much, Darrell. I guess I've got the graveyard shift before lunch, so hopefully everyone can stay engaged. So I have the distinct pleasure to introduce a fabulous panel to you to wrap up today's sessions, focusing on recovery and the applications within manufacturing, transport, and of course health, which we've heard from earlier today. So Darrell needs no introduction. He's capably and confidently emceed today's event today. So I will love to introduce you to our first panelist, Ms. Rachael Leighton. She is the Principal Advisor for Cyber Strategy and Engagement at the Department of Premier and Cabinet. Rachael has a passion for human psychology and a cyber culture uplift. As Principal Advisor to the Victorian Chief Information Security Officer, Rachael uses her creative approach combined with a deep understanding of cyber frameworks and standards to bridge the gap between the board, senior executives, stakeholders, and security specialists. Rachael aims to change the way people think about cybersecurity whilst giving them the tools they need to make a difference. She has developed creatively different and innovative programs which ensure maximum impact and results that clearly map to compliance obligations and actively help the workforce at all levels understand cybersecurity risk and the importance of protecting the company's assets. So welcome, Rachael. Next, I would love to introduce Darren Kane, NBN's Chief Security Officer. He has been the Chief Security Officer for NBN since March 2015. Under his leadership, the security group has become a converged centre of physical and cybersecurity, enabling NBN to better protect its people and assets against evolving threats. So Darren's career history includes 13 years with the Australian Federal Police, 6.5 years with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, the last role as Assistant Director of National Enforcement. So Darren moved to Telstra in 2004, where he completed 11 years in varied management roles, culminating in 4.5 years as the Director of Corporate Security and Investigations. Darren has an MBA, a Diploma of Financial Markets, and is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So that completes our panel members for today. Welcome, Darren.
Thanks very much.
Yep, you are welcome. We have, as you've heard, we have cybersecurity specialists, we have health specialists, and we have, you know, a range of experiences that our panelists can share with you today. And the the hope, actually, there's one more panelist which I actually haven't introduced, I apologise. Phil Robinson is the Australasian Institute of Digital Health Treasurer and Board Member. So Phil is one of Australia's most experienced digital health practitioners. He has 15 years of experience as the Senior Information Technology Executive and more than 12 years experience as a consultant to major health agencies in Victoria and the Middle East. So we're looking forward to deepening that health discussion a little more. Phil has been a board director of hospitals and community health services and is currently a non-executive director and treasurer of the Australasian Institute of Digital Health. So welcome again, and apologies, Phil. Wonderful. So if everyone is on board, what we're going to do is spend maybe 15 minutes on a little bit of moderated Q&A with our esteemed panel, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, which I believe Tyler will continue to facilitate for us. So with that, a lot of organisations these days are working to transform themselves digitally, especially in this current environment where most things need to be done in that virtual digital realm. So from that perspective, you know, I invite you each to share with me, what are three of the common key traits that you've observed in companies who've successfully transitioned to digital, you know, both in this COVID environment where it needs to be rapidly done versus pre-COVID, where they had the time to deliberate and figure out what might be the most important factors. Maybe Darrell, I'll hand to you, given your role at Empirics, to kick us off.
Sure. So yeah, we deal with a range of clients in different industries, in financial sectors, in with superannuation funds and others, right through to AFL clubs, and so very different businesses, very different styles, but some of the common elements we see in those who successfully transfer, to me, the biggest of all is culture. And the culture of the organisation we need to see it come from the top. We need to see really strong leadership and strategy to support that, whereby the organisation creates this as its values, as its principles, and that culture permeates that. We are, you know, if we're going to be customer centric or whatever it is using information and data to underpin what we do and how we measure ourselves and how we measure success. So I won't steal the floor too much, but to me that's the standout.
Fabulous. We've actually had an earlier discussion at the Centre for Business Analytics earlier this morning with Emma Gray from ANZ, who said many of the similar things of having that executive level sponsorship and you know, getting that in within the culture. So Darrell, then I'll pass the baton over to Rachael. Obviously within the DPC, you've had the opportunity to work with various government departments. Rachael, what might you say are the three key traits that you've seen in a successful digital transformation?
Thanks, Anita. Have you guys got me there?
We can hear you.
Oh, great. There we go.
And now,
beautiful. So I love this topic because I think for me there are three really key focuses. One is understanding the importance of not only the technology that you choose, so the bells and the whistles or the actual kit that we purchase, but also to understand that this is more than just transitioning from a paper-based model to a digital model. There's an opportunity to actually reshape some of your processes. So I think that there's that. And then also the people side of saying that, to Darrell's point, it's about culture and taking people on your transformational journey with you. So in saying that, I think it's really also critical to understand that productivity will go down during transformation. Human beings are not carbon operating systems, much to the disappointment of many of my team. But I do have to say that understanding that as we as humans learn new ways, it takes effort. And so therefore the things that we usually do quite simply require a little bit more thought, and therefore we're not focusing on the things that maybe our executives think that we should. And so therefore acknowledging too that it ain't going to be smooth sailing, change is hard, and therefore creating that culture whereby it's okay to make mistakes, and more importantly, it's okay to not know what you don't know, I think is absolutely imperative.
I think you're on mute, Anita.
Everyone has things that they need to learn, like hitting a mute button, right?
Yeah,
So there's always things to learn. So I'm glad, you know, everyone can understand that point about productivity is a really important one, and having that understanding during the time you're making a transformation. So Darren, maybe I'll hand over to you to chat about your experiences on this front. What are the 3 key traits that you've observed that in a successful digital transformation?
Thanks, Anita. Can you hear me? Great. Listen, thanks very much for the opportunity to come along today. I'm really pleased and humbled to be actually asked to talk to you a little bit. You've asked me about the common 3 traits that I've seen in successful companies and those that have actually transitioned either pre-COVID or post-COVID. Look, the one thing that I've absolutely recognised is the competence of companies that have gone tech early. Even from an investment perspective, if you look at the markets at the moment, the ones that have really flourished in what is an unusual and unique environment are those that are actually tech-based. So that's the first obvious thing, is that the world has transformed into a sort of a tech versus traditional organisations, and the tech seems to have the confidence. Look, I'll probably concentrate a little bit on an area of my expertise, which is cybersecurity. And the thing that I've seen as common traits in both in successful and those transitioning to the tech environment is that a little bit around what Rachael has said, is that the focus on the fact that it's all about tech. When I can absolutely say that Darrell's comments around culture, Rachael's comments around process, but certainly the fact that it is dealing with human beings, and from my perspective, it is about the whole process of humans using tech, and thinking that tech tools will actually ensure that everything will go okay. You actually have to put a lot of effort into education and awareness. You have to put a lot into helping people understand how better to do it. The other one that I see is quite a common trait, is that thinking that something is being solved once is solved forever. Unfortunately, that is not the case. What you've got to do as technology evolves, you've actually got to evolve your solutions, particularly your cyber solutions, to meet those constant evolutions. And I think the last one is that, you know, too often we only recognise the value and opportunities and efficiencies that the digital model may deliver. You need to also understand and balance the risks, and appreciate that even at the very start of the transition, when you're putting together the business case, you build in the cost of managing the risk. So I hope that helps.
That's very helpful, and we're going to talk a little bit more about risks in our next question. You know, from an education standpoint, you know, there's lots of places people can find resources as well. Obviously, with the, you know, partnering with academics like, you know, Melbourne Business School or with the data analytics hub, there's always ways that you can find your way in. Because I know our audience comes from a variety of backgrounds. There's big organisations, but there's also small players that were looking at where do I start, especially since I urgently need to get this done. Philip, why don't I hand over to you next and share your expertise in this space?
Well, thanks, Anita. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I think a couple of great segues from the previous speakers, but I think with a sort of a bit of a health flavour, there's no CEO for health, unlike, you know, the ANZ Bank or other large things. And so it really has to be a cooperative environment. And I think the 3 traits, and think about this last night, really segued into what the discussion was earlier today with Ron and others. I think the first one I had was like an innovative management with an appropriate risk appetite. It's appropriate to their industry. And in healthcare, that can be difficult because, you know, most doctors are small businesses in their own right. So telling them what to do is always difficult, especially GPs. Hope there's no GPs on the call. The second thing, apart from that innovative and the cultured management, is quality infrastructure. And that came out with our NBN talks, didn't it? So, you know, good internet connectivity, whether it's server or cloud, how you're getting to your infrastructure and systems, and in healthcare particularly with a high level of redundancy. You just can't afford to have that electronic medical record go down when you've got an emergency department running. And that's been particularly appropriate lately with the COVID. And the third one really came out of the analytics side, which was understanding the potential for analytics and the use of data for feedback about the business. And I read a great term last night, which was called evidence-based practice rather than practice. We have a saying in healthcare about evidence-based practice. And this guy had turned it around to practice-based evidence, use the data from previous events to determine what might be a good thing to do next time. And in a COVID environment, that's particularly germane, I think. They'd be my three, the management structure, the infrastructure, and the understanding of the analytics that you get out of it. That's
exactly right. And I remember one of the sessions I ran for our school, we were talking about, you know, how could you apply machine learning in this pandemic situation? You really can't. You know, once in 100 years, you don't have the data sets that you can look at and try to figure out, well, what will happen next and what should we do based on what's happened before. You probably, the earliest stuff you could look at is the plague, you know, back in early 1900s to see what we could do. But I don't know what data might exist still from that day and age. So we are very fortunate that we have the technology to enable a lot of the things that we can do today, including this session here. So in looking with COVID-19 as the backdrop that we have, how might you balance the currency of information versus the data governance and the privacy, and actually getting everything ticked and tied and done correctly while everyone is speeding towards, I need to get this done, or my business is going to ultimately fail. Phil, why don't you continue on from that discussion, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think the big issue we have in healthcare is change management and adoption. It comes back to that issue around not having a CEO for health. And so you've really got to convince your colleagues to come along with you on the journey and prove that what you're doing in terms of whether it's a digital imaging or pathology or electronic health record, what you're doing. We've seen with the My Health record, for example, in Australia, we spent $2 billion in climbing on that, and still adoption is not brilliant, and certainly not engaged in by all practitioners. I think the other thing that's a real challenge, and it's, as you say, the time frames all have been shortened, is one of the great project risks that I see is hubris, arrogance. Somebody else has done it. How hard could it be? I'll just throw it into my organisation. It goes back, I think, to what Darren was saying earlier. How hard can it be? The pioneers are the guys with the arrows in their back, is one of my favourite. The third one is pick the right vendor to partner with, somebody who's done it before, who's got the experience. So you're not just learning on the job and tripping over and failing when time frames are short. So I think that's a choice of partner is really, really important.
Well, that's a really nice segue, to hand over to Darrell, Darren, and Rachael to chat more about the risks associated with digital transformation and picking the right partner. So, Darrell, obviously, you partner with a lot of organisations to get things set up correctly, to get all the data done in the right place. In the earlier session I talked about today, we with Emma Gray at ANZ, she was talking about Marie Kondoing her data. So, from that perspective, Darrell, maybe you can lead us off, and then hand over the baton to Darren and Rachael to chat a bit more about the cyber risk side of digital transformation.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Anita. I mean, there are numerous risks. So what we see as common themes that come through, generally all of our clients are a problem that's was talked about earlier on today and numerous times, is having lots of different data in lots of different systems, and legacy ones, new platforms, spreadsheets, everything else. And we spend most of our time doing the hard work of bringing that together into an organised single customer view, if you like. And you've got to make a start on that. And any business, big or small, one of the greatest risks is doing nothing, or feeling that you're either too far behind or it's too hard. There is always somewhere to start to head along that journey. But what we've found as a real key, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, is to make sure you're bringing your stakeholders along the journey by showing value to them in a way that they can understand. So no one cares about all the technical ways of doing that, apart from the IT department, of course, but the key stakeholders, the key people who are going to get the outcomes, and that may be people around the business, or it may actually be customers. They have to see the value of what you're doing. So plan for that value, plan for that outcome, and then work backwards from there as to what are the steps that we should do to bring all the stakeholders along the journey. The greatest risk, I think, is not doing that planning. That's over and above all the obvious security stuff, but that would be the key one, I'd say.
Fabulous. And in terms of security stuff, I'm happy to hand over to Darren to talk about some security stuff and what people really should think about as they rapidly pummel through and say, I want a digital transformation done. Darren.
Thanks, Anita. And I'll just sort of almost segue out of what Darrell has already mentioned and talk about value, but also talk about the importance of communication. What we're involved in and the different technical and digital platforms and applications we're dealing with today are complex. The broadband wholesale market that the NBN is working in is a complex situation. So what we've really got to do is make sure that the people that are utilising it understand that this isn't a perfect world. It is quite complex, and that in my role, I have to be right 100% of the time to ensure the security and the reliability of the network, whereas those that would want to take it down or actually have harm upon those that are utilising only have to be right once. So it's really important to actually manage the expectation of users and those people that are relying on technology. And the other one is, when you mentioned privacy, was to talk a little bit about, through communication, what are your expectations and what does the community accept and expect versus the opportunity for value and ease of management. An example might be age-appropriate content online. I mean, we know that some of the industries on the internet are probably inappropriate for those under 18. But are we prepared to actually go through a process of giving up our identity, particularly our age, to access them? And the actual response has been no. So therefore, you actually have to manage the aspect. I'll refer back to the Australia card and the debate we had some 20, 25 years ago. What is the community's expectations and what are they prepared to give up to actually further secure the technology that we continue to manage and get value from?
It's funny you say that. I have my 10 and 12-year-old homeschooling as well, and they're coming to grips with how to use things, how to communicate politely, using digital technology, and these things need to be taught. I mean, whilst we're all able to use technology, we're learning different ways of doing things, and similarly trying to take advantage of all this new data that we've captured. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and Gareth, I don't want to take Rachael's thunder here, but there's a really good example of actually what is appropriate for your child to access and what do you feel is appropriate, because the child probably can't make up their own mind at their age, versus what I might put in place to manage that you may rail against. So it's all about communication and understanding where the limits are.
Yeah. It's good to see some of these softer skills, like the culture and the communication and the training and the education piece highlighted, because I'm sure feel very much that way. Our role is really to educate in terms of the informed use of data and privacy rights of individuals as well. Rachael, you were called upon. It's your turn to share in terms of what kind of advice you can offer in cybersecurity.
Oh, thank you. I could talk about this for hours. And look, I think you're absolutely right when the reality is that this stuff is tough. And I think whether you are a large multinational organisation or whether you are a small business who has to somehow figure out, how do I now move from a bricks and mortar into a clicks and mortar environment, there is so much information out there. All we need to do is do a Google search for, like, how do I set up an online business? And the information is overwhelming. So I guess from my perspective, it's about, to everybody's point, understanding what's in it for the reasons behind why are we doing this digital transformation, and bringing people on that journey with you, and actually having a bit of a brains trust from the organisation, because each one on our own don't have all of the information, and so therefore being able to treat digitalisation as an enabler rather than an inhibitor, I think, is key. And I also think that analysis paralysis piece often gets in the way. And I think for somebody like Darren, where his role is all about security, absolutely he has to get it right 100% of the time. But if your role is more about cyber safety rather than securing everything, because everything is a lot of stuff, what are the crown jewels, what's most important, and focus on that, I think, is a really good start. And I also think thinking that you've got this, to Phil's point, is one of the most dangerous things that we can do. We haven't got this by any stretch. Our adversaries are taking advantage of this digital rapid change, and the fact that not all of us are at that same level of maturity when it comes to the way that we use technology. And so I think understanding what your risk appetite is and doing what you can to mitigate those is most important. I think if you try to do everything, it just becomes a big hot mess. And don't do it alone. Reach out to those of us who have been in this for a long time, because I think I speak for all of us when I say I love what I do. We all love what we do, and we do this because it comes from a really good place in us to make the cyber world a little bit safer. So just as we have all sorts of different players when it comes to making our roads safe, it's the same with digital transformation. We've all got to be in it together. So please don't feel silly or that there are too many dumb questions. Reach out to those experts in the field, and there are many of us here who are willing to help out. You're not in it alone.
Fabulous. I mean, the hackers are constantly upgrading their techniques. So, as Darren said, we need to constantly stay on top of our game. When I was at the Commonwealth Bank, it was a very similar scenario. They invested constantly in cybersecurity. It's just so important.
I actually have, if you don't mind, I've got a stat that I just wanted to share, because I had to look up whether I can share that with you, and I can. So interestingly, we are looking since March. We've been looking at roughly a $250,000 impact of cybercrime to small and medium businesses across Australia. So if you get popped, that's the rough cost of coming back out of that. So what we know is that 60% of small to medium businesses that do get compromised go out of business, because that's a crazy amount of money to spend on coming back from a cyber attack. So this is really important stuff, but there is that help available both through industry and government resources.
And I might just jump in there, Anita, and remind everybody that some of the actual precautions you can take to actually minimise the risk of that is not hard. It's simple security hygiene around strong passwords and the like. So again, information is critical. Hello?
Yep, I'm right here.
Yep.
So I know I only have a couple of minutes left before we, check if Tyler has any questions for us. If you all wouldn't mind sharing what functions and industries would gain greater value in a digitised environment. Perhaps we'll hand over to Phil first to talk about, the health sector, and specifically what areas of that would gain more benefit from being digital.
Well, thanks, Anita. I think, and some of them have been mentioned earlier today, and I've picked up on some of the points that Peter and Joe made in particular. But I think I've been a big advocate and been involved in telehealth for many years, including with the NBN, Darren, by the way, but on the customer side, running Australia's largest NBN telehealth trial. And it's all about the patient. Why should the sick child in Mildura have to spend 8 hours in the car coming to the Royal Children's for a 15-minute appointment and then go back again, and maybe see the professor, or maybe see a resident or registrar? So I think that distance health, and that's really been shown. I think Ron and others showed stats around that. we've got GPs now doing about half their services, at least through telehealth. Unfortunately, about 90% of that through telephone. It's quicker to pick up the phone than to find out how do we work Zoom, but that's changing. And the government have supported that through this COVID process with real money, medical benefits money. So I think that whole patient experience, also patient portals are coming. So now a lot of hospitals have electronic health records. That patient having a portal to make their appointment from their home, to even do their admission paperwork, look up their results, communicate by internal email, if you like, secure email with their practitioner. All those sort of patient experience issues are important. And certainly for private hospitals, gives patients a stickiness, if you like, to the business. So whereas public, you go where you need to go, but certainly for the private sector, it's very important. I think the last one is going back to that analytics thing again, which is around what I said before about practice-based evidence. So using the data you're starting to build up in your medical records to say, okay, well, we've had 500 cases of diabetes last month in the Greek community. What could be going on here? A bit like, I don't know if you're familiar with Snow's pump, but that was the original evidence and research into why cholera was forming around a little pump in London. So it's looking at clusters of disease. Why is that happening? How can it be happening? What can we do about it? So I think that use of analytics from the growth in data in healthcare is really taking off. So that's where the benefits are, I think, Anita, in some of those areas: telehealth, remote monitoring, as Joe talked about, and then using the data for analytics.
I really enjoyed Joe's session. I mean, the patient outcomes and what they've achieved with that project are remarkable. So I'm, again, mindful of the time. So Darrell, Darren and Rachael, are there any thoughts you would like to share in regards to application to industries that would benefit the most from a digital transformation?
I'll answer very quickly. Tell me which ones won't.
Yeah.
Tell me which industries and sectors won't benefit from taking advantage of connectivity in the digitised environment. Everything you can think of, there is a benefit, there is a risk, and balance that out, but certainly the value is there.
I agree 100%, both in any business, big or small. There's opportunities for not only growth and customer service, but efficiencies and cost saving on the other side. So, obviously, biased and preaching to the converted in many cases here, but that's where if businesses are unsure of how to make a start, things like the Northlink Data Hub are perfect for that. Just get a research project going, get a couple of smart people in, and they can look at a problem and look at how analytics and data digitisation can assist the company. Make a start, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I'll be really quick too. I think I'm probably frozen on the screen, am I? In my concentrating face. But I think what's most important for me is to say now is the time to give fledgling companies a go, like new companies, small startups. Reach out to the cyber ecosystem and the IT ecosystem. There are some pretty amazing human beings that are here in Victoria, and I think reaching out to that domestic talent is absolutely imperative as well. So lean on some of those smaller organisations who quite frankly need a bit of economic stimulus from us all. We're all doing it really tough, so giving somebody a go, bringing somebody in, potentially an intern or somebody who's currently studying for some work experience, it becomes mutually beneficial. Think outside the square of how you can help other people through their digitalisation too. That's it from me.
Thanks, Rachael. I guess one last piece of advice from me before closing it out from that perspective, being more granular on the types of projects, because we also have student internship groups, is supply chain and finance type projects are typically faster to implement and demonstrate value as pilot projects versus marketing or traditional marketing campaign. Then you need to measure the outcomes from that versus projects that might be done within the finance space or the supply chain optimization space if you're looking at a function in which to start a data pilot project. So that's what we've observed based on our research here at the centre. So I am out of time. I'm a little bit over, so I'm going to actually thank all of our panelists today. Thank you, Darrell, Darren, Philip, and Rachael for joining us. And I'm going to hand back over to Mr. David Williamson, the CEO of the Melbourne Innovation Centre, to close us out for the day.
Thanks, Anita.